Vane and the Vaylith. Vane trudged through the jagged, snow-covered path winding up the mountainside. The bag on his back weighed heavy on his shoulders, packed with various items to help him along his journey, and yet he carried on, as always. He didn't have much of a choice. He was so close to the doctor rumored to live beyond the cliffs of these very mountains. So close to the hope that he could find a remedy to wake his daughter, Callista. She was waiting for him back home, stuck in a slumber that seemed to continue to drag on and on. She'd been comatose for so long that he could hardly remember the soft and fragile sound of her voice, her laughter. He couldn't quit now, he knew that, but each step up the mountain felt heavier than the previous one. He could feel his mind teetering on the edge between sanity and the void of madness caused by that damned flower. It was always like this nowadays. He could hardly remember a time where he was fully stable. Maybe once this was all over, he would be. Being lost in thought, as he so often found himself, he almost missed the fact that there was a break in the trees ahead. A clearing, maybe? He wasn't quite sure. He warily stepped into the area that lay beyond, unsure of what he might find. It was an entrance to an abandoned village, it seemed. If the ruined and hollowed-out houses that stretched before him were of any indication. Time had long forgotten this place, and humanity had moved on quite some time ago. A faint sense of sorrow and regret pooled in the air, invading his lungs and nearly suffocating him with it. He hesitated. Something felt wrong about this place. As apprehensive as he felt, the biting wind and freezing flurries of snow pressed him forward, urging him towards the center of the village. It was an interesting place, really. There was a time where this place would have been beautiful, filled with friendly and inviting people and warm homes. Not anymore, however. Now it was just empty and sad. As he passed the ruined husks of each home, whispers slid from the shadows, soft, mocking, familiar. It made him feel deeply uneasy, and he was suddenly feeling an urgency to turn around and leave. He forced himself to take a breath and ignore them. His focus was Callista. He had to get back. Then the world shifted. Standing in the town square, Vane saw himself. Just not as he was. Dread filled his body, trapping his heart in an icy grip. His hands sparked, though did not light quite yet. He knew what this thing was. He'd come to know plenty of creatures during his travels, and he was silently cursing himself for forgetting. This was a Vaylith. It resided in places like this. Left behind and abandoned. He didn't know much about it. Nobody did. They were rare enough that there had not been many studies. He just knew they were bad, dangerous. He knew he was in trouble. The Vaylith stood tall, its skin scorched and blistered far more severely than his own, as if it had been consumed by its own fire like he almost had been. Its eyes, hollow and burned black, radiated a cruelty and malevolence that chilled Vane deeper than the mountain's frost ever could. The creature's face mirrored his own, though it was twisted into a smile that was too wide, too wrong. "You're nothing but ruin," it whispered. Its voice was his, but it carried an echo that dug into his ears almost like knives. "Your wife's blood is on your hands. Your daughter's fate will be no different. You'll burn her just like everything else." Vane's breath hitched like it had been physically caught in his throat. He couldn't breathe. It was wrong. He knew it was wrong. But it was so damn difficult to keep its words from piercing into his chest like an arrow. The Vaylith's cracked lips curved into a mocking smile. Its hollow eyes burned with cruel amusement. It knew it was getting to him, and it loved that fact. "You've already lost. Face it, you can't save her," it hissed through its teeth, that smile still ever present. "You've burned everything you've ever loved. It's in your blood. Always has been." Vane tried to speak up, but he found that he couldn't. No matter how he tried, he simply couldn't make his voice work. It was like his vocal cords had been severed, his lips sewn shut, the words carved into him ruthlessly. The madness in the back of his mind stirred, and he felt the already fragile hold on his mind splinter for a horrifying moment. His knees buckled, and the bag he'd been carrying dropped to the ground with an audible thud. The Vaylith was right. Every action he had taken, every sacrifice he made, the things he failed to do, it all had only dragged him deeper into ruin, deeper into failure, his revenge, his powers, his choices. There was almost no doubt in his mind that they would end with his daughter consumed by the fire within him. He couldn't move, couldn't breathe. The world seemed to narrow on his failures, all laid out on display within the hollow eyes of the thing wearing his face. He felt his mind slip further, and he wasn't sure how much longer it would be until he lost his grip on it entirely. Just as he felt his panic begin to rise, just as he thought he would lose it, something in his memory stirred. Callista's small voice calling for him, her little hands grabbing at his and the smile on her face as she led him to her latest discovery. The way her chest rose and fell as she fell asleep, curled up on his chest in the middle of the night. She still needed him. He was all that she had left, her only chance of waking up. He'd be damned if he let this thing cause him to go off the rails. He wouldn't let it spit its lies at him any longer. And so Vane forced himself to speak. "No," he said, his voice raw but firm. "You don't speak for me." The creature's mocking, vicious smile widened. "Don't I? I'm the very fear that you are too cowardly to confront. You can't run from me." The creature seemed confident, calm. It was sure he wouldn't fight. After all, nobody else could. "I'm not running." Vane took a step forward, fire flickering to life along his scarred hands. "You can show me every mistake, every failure, but you don't decide who I am." With every word, his voice was stronger, more sure of himself. This thing wouldn't get to make a meal of him. He'd make sure. The Vaylith faltered for a moment, its smile dropping just a fraction and its eyes narrowing. If Vane didn't know any better, he'd say the thing looked annoyed. He took a breath and continued. "I loved them both. I still do." His voice burned with the same intensity as the blazing fire that made up his entire being. The air between him and the creature shimmered with heat, the snow around them beginning to melt. "You're nothing but the shadow of the man I refuse to become." The creature snarled at him, its smile breaking into frustration and a little bit of anger. Its voice took on a mocking undertone, now edged with fury. "Love won't save you. You'll fail again. It's only a matter of time before your control slips. You'll hurt her, like you hurt everyone else." Its twisted grin returned, though its teeth were sharper, and it looked more sinister. "And when you do, no one will be there to stop you." It was trying to intimidate him, hypnotize him once more. It wouldn't work this time, however. The fire in his hands grew into a blaze, engulfing the creature's form faster than it could blink, and gradually turning it to ash. Vane pushed back the doubts, the despair, the fear he felt. He didn't need to be perfect. He didn't need to be free of guilt. He only needed to get back to his daughter, to keep moving forward, find the remedy, wake her up. No matter how much the past tried to drown him. The Vaylith howled as it burned, its form flickering and distorting. Through the flames, Vane could see its gaze, full of hatred and disdain. He couldn't care less, he just let it burn away. With a final burst of flame, the creature's form shattered and vanished into the cold mountain air. Silence returned, and the forgotten village stood empty once more. He sank to his knees, unable to keep himself upright for the moment. His breaths came hard and fast, but he no longer felt as if he was drowning in doubt and fear. He knew the worst version of himself would always be there, lurking in the shadows of his mind. He knew that the creature had left its mark, done its damage, no matter how short the encounter had been. But it didn't have to win. He took a breath and grabbed the bag from the ground, pushing himself to stand and slinging it back over his shoulder. He righted himself and took one more moment to steady his breathing and calm his mind before he set out again on the path. He was eager to leave this place behind. He was eager to see his child again.